Okay, I'm going to begin now, and I may have to periodically let other people in, but I want to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Reiner, and I am with the Arizona Preservation Foundation. We started this program actually during COVID, so it's about 5 years on, when we had to cancel our annual conference, and so we decided to have preservation in place. And we offered free webinars, and we have continued to do that. So today's first meeting of a part session, for you to know, will be recorded. So if you have to leave early, you miss part of it, you can always go back onto the Arizona Preservation Foundation YouTube channel, and you can find that. And then you can also look for previous ones. We will send you out a reminder saying it has been posted. Other house rules: if you have questions, we prefer that you wait until the end, but enter those questions anytime in the chat, and then we will use those to ask our presenter, and she will answer those hopefully in the minute, which is pleasing to you. So I now want to turn this over. We'll introduce our speaker. I want to turn it over to Margaret Hangen, who is my co-chair in planning particular webinars. And if you do have a thought, an idea you would like to maybe even present yourself, please leave that information for us in the chat, and we'll get in touch with you. And thank you, Margaret. It is all yours.
Okay, I get the distinct pleasure of introducing Shannon Plummer, our speaker. Shannon is the senior archaeologist with Jacobs Engineering Group. She's a native Midwesterner. Shannon has found her forever home in the beautiful Sonoran Desert. With over 25 years of experience in heritage preservation, cultural resource management, consulting, and regulatory compliance, she has dedicated her career to studying and preserving Arizona's archaeology and history. She has designed, managed, and contributed to hundreds of archaeological projects and compliance efforts throughout the state, and has written hundreds of archaeological reports, treatment plans, consultation letters, policies, and peer-reviewed articles. As Arizona's former state archaeologist, she is a recognized expert on the Arizona Antiquities Act and complementary statutes pertaining to cultural resource management and preservation in Arizona. When not doing archaeology, Shannon enjoys crocheting, dancing, and playing outside. Welcome, Shannon, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm really, excuse me, honored to see how many people have shown up today, making me a little nervous, but we're all friends. I'm going to share my screen so you can watch my slides. If I can find the right one. There we go. Are you all seeing the slideshow?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, snap.
There, it's coming on now.
All right, cool. Sorry about that.
No worries. It's there.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for attending. Today, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the Arizona Antiquities Act. My name is Shannon Plummer, as you were recently introduced. I'm a senior archaeologist with Jacobs. As you are likely aware, this is the first of a three-part series focusing on cultural resources legislation in Arizona. Before I get any further, I just want to thank the Arizona Preservation Foundation for the invitation to participate in this, and also thank you to Jacobs for the support. And I have a few photos scattered throughout. So this first one is a photograph taken up on Perry Mesa in Arizona on the way up to Flagstaff. So our agenda today, we're going to just start with a few housekeeping items, then talk briefly about the history of the Arizona Antiquities Act, otherwise known as the AAA, not to be confused with the organization that will give your car a jump if you get stranded on the side of the highway. Then we're going to go through each statute encompassed by the AAA, as well as Arizona Revised Statute 41-865, and then talk a little about the implementing rules. Then I'm going to do a quick overview of some other laws relating to cultural resources in Arizona, and we'll talk about a little handout I've made for you. And then there will be time for lots of questions. And I know this is probably second hat to a lot of you. I saw a lot of archaeological friends logging on, but to others, this is going to be completely new. So I encourage you to ask questions. I'm going to do my best to explain terms as I go, but if I miss one or you just forgot what it meant, just drop a question in the chat and I'll either answer it later or one of the experienced archaeologists can jump in and answer it for you. Just for reference, I'm not going to be checking the chat while I talk. So, oh, and there my cat just walked over the keyboard. So I guess we're talking about housekeeping. So if you are not speaking, please turn off your microphone because it's distracting to me. And the ambient noise can also distract others. Feel free to type in questions as I talk, but I'm going to save them all to the end. Otherwise, I get out of the zone. And as Donna had mentioned, the presentation is going to be posted on APF's YouTube channel, so you don't need to feel the need to frantically take notes. I don't want anyone getting carpal tunnel on my watch. So again, Margaret gave a very humbling introduction about me, and I'll just throw in a little more. I saw a lot of you guys already know me. And so for your entertainment, here's a photo of me as a young grad student around the turn of the century. And for those who don't know me, just envision the same person, but middle-aged and kind of surly. I got my undergraduate degree from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio in the late 1900s. Yes, people think I was either in the UK or in Florida. However, I was in a cornfield outside of Cincinnati. And a fun fact, Miami University was established in 1809, which was before Florida was even a state. I got my master's degree at the University of Arizona and have been an archaeologist for pushing 30 years now. And my professional focus has been Hohokam archaeology and legal compliance. And as Margaret mentioned, I'm the former Arizona Antiquities Act administrator, also known as the state archaeologist, and I currently work for Jacobs. So let's get to it. The history of the Arizona Antiquities Act in just a handful of sentences. So the goal of the AAA was to, sorry, just got my cat's distracting me here, was passed in 1927 following the passage of the Federal Antiquities Act in 1906. The goal of the AAA was to stop the looting of archaeological and paleontological sites in Arizona, as well as to put a halt to the exporting of Arizona's artifacts to other museums throughout the country. Arizona is proudly just the third state in the nation to pass statewide antiquities legislation. The AAA designated the Arizona State Museum, or ASM, as the organization responsible for administering the law and requires that all artifacts and fossils recovered from state lands be curated at ASM or an ASM-approved repository. The act was written by ASM's first director, Byron Cummings, who you'll see on the left, as well as State Senator William Joyner, who's in the middle, and it was signed into law, as I said, in 1927 by Governor George Hunt. So there have been several minor amendments and 3 major amendments to the AAA. The first major amendment was written in the 1960s by ASM's second director, Emil Howry. He is the gentleman on the upper left with the pipe, as well as the the guy hanging out in the excavated canal. It's just one of my favorite photos, so I always include it. Howry was concerned with the potential loss of archaeological sites as a result of the increasing rate of development throughout the state. So he added amendments ensuring that archaeologists conducting work on state lands were qualified to do so, and that collections and associated information were properly preserved. In the 1980s, with the rapid rate of development in Arizona, gave rise to the burgeoning cultural resources management industry. For those not familiar with CRM, it is a private industry providing archaeological and anthropological services, most often to aid agencies and construction and engineering firms comply with state and federal laws relating to cultural resources. So in the 80s, ASM's third director, Raymond Thompson, a young photo of him is on the upper right. He recognized the growth of the CRM industry and its importance and amended the AAA to allow permits to be issued to archaeologists employed at CRM firms. Previously, AAA permits were only issued to university-based and museum-based archaeologists. Then in the 1990s, Raymond Thompson amended the AAA again to specify protections and procedures for human remains identified on state and private lands. This was done around the same time as the passage of the Federal Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, also known as NAGPRA, which offered similar protections for Native American remains on federal lands. And I've got an article posted here written by Beth Grindell, who was the sixth director of the Arizona State Museum, which is available in the Kiva Journal by the published by the Arizona Historical, no, what is it? What I can't, Archaeological and Historic Society, sorry, brain fart. So the first statute in the AAA is 15-1631, and this established the Arizona State Museum. And it was established for the collection and preservation of archaeological resources, specimens of mineral wealth, and the flora and fauna of the state. ASM is located at the University of Arizona in a beautiful historic building, which originally was the University of Arizona Library. And it is directed and managed by the Arizona Board of Regents, or ABOR. Over time, the mission of the ASM has changed to focus specifically on native cultures of Arizona and northern Mexico. So they prefer only to take collections of archaeological objects. However, so they now encourage paleontological and mineral specimens to be curated at natural history museums. The most common one is the Arizona Museum of Natural History. So, interesting fact, although ASM is legally obligated to exist, the state gives $0 in funding. So in order to meet their mandates, they charge fees for their services and for curation. And the ability or need to charge fees is actually part of the statute. They're obligated to recover the costs it takes to administer the law. ARS 41-841 is an interesting one. It stipulates that archaeological artifacts and paleontological fossils cannot be collected from state lands without a permit from ASM. And state land, according to the AAA, is defined uniquely. It is formally defined in ARS 41-844, but applies to all of the statutes in the AAA. And it is defined as land owned or controlled by the state of Arizona or by any agency, instrumentality, or political subdivision of the state of Arizona, including any county or municipal corporation. So in plain English, if the land isn't federal, tribal, or privately owned, it is considered state land and thus subject to compliance with the AAA. And so this includes obvious agencies like the State Land Department or the Department of Transportation, but also smaller entities like school district and parks. So that's something people often don't think of when they're thinking about state or just publicly owned land. And the statute defines an archaeological specimen as any item resulting from past human life or activities which is at least 100 years old. And this includes petroglyphs, pictographs, paintings, pottery, tools, ornaments, jewelry, textiles, ceremonial objects, weapons, armaments, vessels, ships, vehicles, and human remains. It specifically states that arrowheads, coins, and bottles are excluded from this protection. However, I highly discourage you from collecting those items because A, they are then lost their important provenience information, but also you could be charged with trespassing or theft. Oddly, ARS 41-844, a couple statutes ahead of where we are right now, stipulates that anything 50 years old or older is considered archaeological. So this creates a confusing discrepancy. However, ASM defaults to the 50-year rule, they call it, to ensure maximum protection of cultural resources and also to decrease the likelihood of a AAA violation occurring. And this definition, the 50-year rule, is consistent with the language in the National Historic Preservation Act. And violations to the statutes included in the AAA are built into the state's criminal code and include class 1, 2, and 3 misdemeanors and class 3 and 5 felonies. It's important to note, although the ASM administers the AAA, they're not a law enforcing agency. Violations get reported to the state attorney general's office, who then makes the decision as to whether or not they want to follow up with further investigation. ARS 41-842 requires that a permit be issued by ASM before work that will damage an archaeological site will occur or before artifacts can be collected. As previously noted, only organizations employing professional archaeologists are eligible to receive AAA permits, and none of these activities can occur until the permit has been issued and is actually in hand. Non-collection surveys also may not be conducted until there are permits allowing for non-collection survey that are issued annually, but archaeologists are not permitted to go into the field under those permits without notifying ASM first. And I've got the obligatory little photo there of Indiana Jones, who had the tendency to collect objects purely for the sake of collection, and without a permit and without taking lots of notes of where the artifacts were taken from. So us archaeologists love to rant about the fact that he really wasn't acting as a real archaeologist. Sorry, my cat just really wants to participate. And so we've got two different types of AAA permits. A blanket permit is a single permit issued for a given calendar year, and it allows for any number of non-collection surveys to be conducted. However, each individual project conducted under a AAA permit must be registered with ASM, and ASM must be notified before going into the field every time work will occur under the permit. And the form that is called a notification of intent to survey. Project-specific permits are issued for any project that will involve ground disturbance within an archaeological site, the collection of artifacts, or the non-collection survey of large areas. And large areas defined as 640 acres or more, or a single section, or 10 linear miles or more. And a single permit is issued for each of these types of projects, and a treatment plan must be submitted with the permit application, and unless there's a general plan in exists, which is common for archaeologists to know about, but those who are not archaeologists don't really need to worry about it. This is a photo of Kanishpa, a National Register of Historic Places listed archaeological site. And 41-843 prohibits the impact or otherwise altering of any archaeological or paleontological site or object on state land unless one has a permit from ASM. ARS 41-844 requires any person in charge of a survey, excavation, or construction project to report to ASM if they identify any paleontological, archaeological, or historical site or object over the course of work on state land and to preserve it. This is important for those, especially for those who are not archaeologists. The goal is always to preserve in place. Archaeology is by nature, like the excavation of archaeological sites is by nature a destructive process. And once the site is excavated, you can't get it back. And so for the sake of the protection of sites, we always prefer to avoid them because they're safest as they are in the ground. However, if it cannot be preserved in place, then whatever action is going to be taken must be reviewed and approved by ASM and permitted by ASM. And as I mentioned, when we were talking about statute 41-841, this statute defines discoveries 50 years old or older and requires that you report them to ASM if you identify them. And this applies to anyone. If if you see a site or an object and you're on state land, please call ASM and let them know that it's there, and they will take further action as appropriate and necessary to record it and try to keep it protected. And I have more information in a handout at the end of the presentation, which will have the information on how to reach out to ASM and do this reporting, as well as a whole bunch of other information. And I'd like to make sure to point out that the statute also protects human remains, funerary objects, sacred ceremonial objects, and objects of national or tribal patrimony. And it prohibits the disturbance of remains unless approved by the director of ASM, and even then, only if absolutely necessary. And just to note, the ARS 41-844 applies to all human remains, regardless of cultural affinity, which is unlike NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which only protects remains of Native American and Native Hawaiian descent. And human remains disturbances are handled by ASM's repatriation office. And just an important note, if you do identify human remains and they're less than 50 years old, don't call ASM, call the cops. And I just wanted to note, this statute includes considerable discussion of human remains and procedures to follow in the event of their encounter. And this is because they're incredibly significant and very sensitive. So sometimes people think that this statute applies only to human remains, but that's not the case. It applies to all cultural resources 50 years old or older, including but not limited to human remains and other specified items. And this is a photo of Camp Naco down in southern Arizona, which they are in the process of doing some preservation and starting a lot of interesting public programming. So I encourage you to do some reading up about it. It was the home of a troop of Buffalo Soldiers back in the early 1900s. My husband's here, he's helping me when I have these little forgetful moments. So those are the statutes encompassed by the Arizona Antiquities Act. Their Arizona State Museum is also mandated to administer the ARS 41-865, and that applies to private land. And this is the only state statute applicable specifically to private land, and it protects human remains and funerary objects only. Unfortunately, all other cultural resources on private land are not protected. However, other laws may apply depending on where the land is located and where the funding is coming from. that may require laws or may require cultural resources be considered prior to some sort of action on the land. And we're going to be talking about that, how the AAA and other laws work together in 2 weeks at the third presentation in this series. Sometimes people refer to ARS 41-865 as Arizona's burial law, but we highly discourage that. Not only is it inaccurate, but it is considered disrespectful by some tribal communities. ASM encourages people to refer to the statute simply by its number, ARS 41-865, rather than the colloquialism. And there is some information available on the ASM website and in a published article talking about preferred terminology when discussing human remains. For example, just the term burial is is discouraged. It is preferred to use the term funerary or mortuary feature, funerary feature. There's also several other terminological things that are preferred just to show respect for the remains and the fact that they are not archaeological objects. They are the remains of actual people and relatives to actual living people. And there's some information in the handout that I mentioned earlier. And here we have a view of private land from a site. So a few other important state and local laws. First being ARS 39-125 stipulates that archaeological site information is confidential. And this is for the safety of the resources and to protect from looting. And so this information can be withheld. The release, if the release of the information is determined that it can create a reasonable risk of vandalism, theft, or other damage to a site, then that archaeologists are allowed to decline to disclose the information. There are also parallel federal statutes protecting sensitive archaeological information, and that includes my little troublemaker cat loves to distract me. That includes Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA requests. Next one is 41-845, which states you cannot reproduce artifacts and try to sell them as actual artifacts or fossils. It is encouraged that you try prehistoric technologies and try to make objects the way that they did 1,000 years ago, but you can't sell them to people as artifacts. If you do, you could be convicted of a Class 2 misdemeanor. And this photo here shows some student reproduction of artifacts that was done at a field school during a learning exercise, which is fantastic, but I have it on good authority. They did not try to sell them for profit, pretending that they were actual artifacts. 41-846 stipulates that if you do collect artifacts and fossils illegally, you have to hand them over to ASM. And that is a Class 2 misdemeanor. Let's see. The State Historic Preservation Act also provides protections to archaeological sites on state lands, although it defines state land slightly differently than the AAA does. And we're going to talk, Mary Ellen Walsh from the State Historic Preservation Office is going to talk at length about that next week. And just to note, Arizona is one of only a handful of states in the nation that has more than one state act governing preservation and disposition of archaeological resources. And I think this is really important and fantastic because it offers a really great checks and balances system to make sure archaeological information and archaeological resources are offered the greatest amount of protections. And also several local ordinances are in place in various cities and counties that protect cultural resources within their jurisdiction. And these can apply to private land. But I'm not talking about those in any depth today. So the ABOR, the Arizona Board of Regents, has published a set of rules in order to implement the statutes that are encompassed by the AAA. And they outline specific procedures with regards to how things such as permitting, archaeological qualification reviews, and curation should be handled. It also outlines the required content for treatment plans and reports. All of ASM's policies and procedures are based on that set of rules. And there is also a separate set of rules operationalizing 41-865. So that concludes the discussion of the law. Just for some more information, the remainder of this series is next week an in-depth look at the State Historic Preservation Act. And the week after that, Aaron Davis from the State Historic Preservation Office and I will be discussing navigating the complex web of situation where more than one statute and or federal cultural resources laws apply. There's a mouthful for you. Aaron Davis, myself, and Dr. Will Russell have authored an article talking more about the State Historic Preservation Act and the AAA. That is going to be coming up in the fall issue of the Journal of Arizona Archaeology. So keep your eye out for that. And you can also get more information about all things cultural resource and historic resource preservation if you attend the APF's annual Preserve AZ conference. And when I am done talking, I'm going to throw into the chat this handout where there's more information for you to look at after this, hopefully to answer questions. And so on the handout, we've got the specific language for all of the statutes that I mentioned, as well as the implementing rules, and links to how to contact the ASM and the State Historic Preservation Office. And as a reminder, if you do find an archaeological or paleontological site or artifact or human remains, then please report to the ASM to these two individual email addresses. And if you're really interested, after hearing me talk about all this exciting legislation, you can volunteer to help out with preservation in the state. One way is to volunteer with the Arizona Preservation Foundation, and you already know about them since you registered today, but here's a link to their website. And Arizona also has an incredible site steward program that is through the State Parks and Trails Department, and they train approved volunteers to visit archaeological sites and report any damages or looting made to them. And they also, if are interested, participate in educational opportunities for the general public. And then, as promised, some additional reading. If you wanted to read Beth Grindel's article with the in-depth history of the AAA, you can find it in an issue of the Kiva dating to 2017. The Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society, which was for whatever reason in the back of my brain and couldn't think of. This article, as far as I can tell, is not open access online. So if you want to read it, you'll need to go to the library. Additional information about respectful terminology when discussing human remains can be found on ASM's website. There's a table showing common terms and their preferred words instead. And I was lucky enough to participate in a project kind of developing that list, as well as talking about why the list is important. And it's been published into an article that was published in Advances in Archaeological Practice, which is open access. So there's a link on where you can find it. So back to this. Time for questions. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see you guys easier. And just a reminder, there's my contact information, and feel free to reach out anytime to ask questions about archaeology, AAA. I'm a total nerd and I really find this stuff interesting and like talking about it. So you'll make my day if you ask me to talk more.
Thank you, Shannon. This is Margaret. So far we don't have questions in the chat, but we do have a comment from Jacob Sidig. So Jacob, my bad if I mispronounce your last name. It says people wanting to read the article Shannon mentioned can also reach out to me directly. I'm one of the current editors of Kiva. My email address is if you guys can see the chat, it's actually in there. I won't read it, but his email address is in there if you want to check that out directly. And I recommend it highly.
So great. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah. Are there any questions? I know I learned a few things in this presentation. Anyone else? Since there's nothing in the chat, if you want to put up your hand or any questions?
Oh, I see a question here from M. Pike asking to briefly discuss how the AAA operates with municipalities.
Okay.
So,
just put in. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the AAA applies to municipal land. And before I start that, while it's fresh in my mind, just to point out, the AAA applies only to the land ownership. So it has to be owned by city, county, or the state. If it is a state agency working in, say, an easement across federal land, then the AAA does not apply. Even though it's the state agency doing whatever the work it is, if they're not the owner of the land, the AAA does not apply. However, as we'll talk about in the future sessions as part of this series, other laws such as the State Historic Preservation Act or the National Historic Preservation Act might apply. And so with regards to, here, I'll put my camera back on so I can feel like I'm talking to people better. So a municipality, if they're doing any sort of ground disturbing work, is still obligated to comply with the AAA. And so it's recommended to reach out to a professional archaeologist, or not recommended. They need to talk to an archaeologist to make sure there aren't any sites in the area that is going to be impacted. I'm sorry, I'm turning the chat off so I don't get distracted by it while I'm answering this question. Lost my train of thought, of course. This is why I like to save questions to the end, so this doesn't happen in the middle of the presentation. The first step is usually doing an archaeological survey, and that is how they identify whether or not there are cultural resources in the area that's going to be disturbed. And then going from there. In the case of like local ordinances, this might apply to private land. So in those cases, the local ordinance would apply. For example, I know Pima County down here in where Tucson is, has an ordinance regarding grading. So before anyone grades their land, privately owned land, they need to consider cultural resources. However, in that case, the AAA would not apply. And there are also cases where if it's, say, private land and a project is happening on it where federal funding, I guess I'm getting off the topic of local ordinances, but just to point out, if it's private land and an action is happening that's being federally funded, then even though it's privately owned, the National Historic Preservation Act would apply. So again, we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, and I think this will be good to add on to this. The next question is what are some of the biggest enforcement challenges of the AAA?
That is a great question. And there are many. The first being, it's really hard to prove. You might see a site that has been looted, but unless you see someone actually doing it, then you can't prove it. And so with regards to AAA violations, the ASM and archaeologists ourselves don't have any individual legal recourse, but when it does get reported to the Attorney General's office, they will sometimes decide to take it up as a case. I just had one more thing I was going to say. It does happen occasionally that a construction firm will violate the act. This happens often. I've seen it happen most commonly when there's a site and there are no features that are going to, like surface features, going to be impacted by ground disturbance, but it is within a site. So there's a possibility for some subsurface features to be present. And it's a small enough area where doing like a full scale excavation or testing isn't appropriate. Then the archaeologists know this, but I'm saying this for the purposes of you non-archaeologists out there, an archaeological monitor would be present watching the construction to stop everyone if a feature or artifacts are identified during the digging. And occasionally those construction firms get ahead of themselves and will start digging before the archaeologist gets there, or either on a given day or just at all. So that is very frustrating, and those instances do get reported to the Attorney General's office. There are also the occasional violation made by archaeologists themselves, which are always accidents, but ASM does keep track of them, just because if a cultural resources firm is consistently messing up in complying with the AAA, then there's a larger issue. But those are most commonly things like forgetting to notify ASM before going into the field when they're using their blanket permit. That's the most common one. Occasionally, they'll forget to follow the procedures in the treatment plan that they wrote, and that doesn't happen often, but it does occasionally. So yeah, but back to like my original point, it is when it's just general destruction and looting, vandalism of archaeological sites, it's really difficult to prove. I know the Bureau of Indian Affairs has some better luck with it because they have people on staff who work specifically to identify that stuff, and they're like CSI people, and they track evidence and have the authority to stop people in their tracks if they do come upon it, which again is rare. It's not something I recommend doing as a private citizen or an archaeologist, because it can be very dangerous. You never know how the person's going to react. But yeah, the summary of the very long answer is it's very difficult, but has been done.
All right. Next question. Thank you for this question. As an engineer and non-archaeologist, can you please elaborate on the legalities of how we can share some of the details with site developers, engineers, so that the sites can be avoided or preserved?
Oh, that's a great question. So we kind of think of it as a need to know basis. Of course, if they're developing whatever the blueprints and engineering drawings, they need to know where the sites are, so ideally they can avoid them. And so of course that information can be released. We don't like to see just raw data being sent out to non-archaeologists, like the engineering firms and stuff, without, because if you just get the, like, here are all the sites, there's no context there, no interpretation. So like if you want to do research at the official repository of the state, which is the Archaeological Records Office at the Arizona State Museum, they only allow access to professional archaeologists. So you as an engineering firm, if you would like that information, you would need to reach out to a professional archaeologist who can gather that information and then interpret it for you and how that information applies specifically to your project, and will give recommendations as to how to navigate forward should there be cultural resources in your project area. And just as a note, just because something is archaeological doesn't mean you have to do additional work. I mean, granted, we love to see sites avoided, but there are certain types of sites and situations where a site may be, the legal terminology is usually being eligible or not eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, which is something that the SHPO is going to talk about next week. But basically, if a site is considered not eligible, then it doesn't meet one of 4 specific set of criteria. And so it doesn't have enough uniqueness or information potential, affiliation with historic people or events, or significant architectural qualities. And in those cases, those sites often do not need further or require further treatment. But again, that information needs to come, you'll get that information from an archaeologist, and any treatment procedures would be not only made by the archaeologist, but also need to be approved by the whatever agency is in charge there. In the case of state land, it would be the Arizona State Museum and the State Historic Preservation Office. And for federal land, it would be more just the SHPA or the SHPO, but also, and also this in like any involved or interested party can be privy to participate in like consultation with the caveat, as far as the that the archaeological locational information is considered confidential. So the same information may not be submitted to all parties, but quite often in consultation, tribal communities are involved, and their input is considered incredibly useful because not all significant tribal sites are available, are in the archaeological record, and archaeologists don't always know everything about them. It helps to, for Native American pre-contact and historic sites, talk to the descendants and directly.
Okay. So the next question is, can you talk about NOIs? I assume that means notice of intent.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit more specifically about needing to submit an additional NOI if a project lasts longer than the field dates, or if additional survey is needed at a later date.
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, once a NOI has been submitted, or for those who aren't familiar, it has you're required to put the dates that you plan on being in the field. It doesn't have to be exact. You're like, sometime in the next month, I'm going to be doing this field work. So I'm sending the NOI now. So I don't, so it's good to go. And then you do the field work, and more often than not, you're good to go. But sometimes the fieldwork gets halted for whatever reason, because the project gets delayed, or they do the fieldwork and then the client comes back and says, oh, we just realized we need to acquire, some additional land and we need to go back out. All you need to do is submit, I think they have like an addendum form at ASM, but basically you just send a follow-up form saying, hey, we said we're going to be in the field in these dates, but actually it's going to now extend to this other, a month into the future or something like that, or let them know we need to add this to our project area. And in that case, you just need to send a map to let them know the additional area that you'll be working in. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, as I mentioned, there is a permit required for long-term and large-scale non-collection surveys. And that's, and it requires treatment plans and stuff like that. But if a project is getting started and it's going to be done in a month, and then all of a sudden gets pushed back 6 months, so the overall calendar timeline of the project changes, at least in my tenure there, they just extended the NOI. They didn't make you backtrack and get a project specific permit like you would have had to had that information been all decided up front.
Okay, great. Next question. If you were to find human remains as a layperson, how do you determine the age of those remains?
That's a great question. I would start by calling the police first, letting them take a look, and they will use their CSI people to figure out if they believe they are more than 50 years old. And if they do, then they will just, excuse me, refer you to ASM.
Okay, and it looks like we have one more question, and then Donna wants to make some final remarks. So I will go what I believe is the last question. As archaeologists increasingly work with ethnographers, the permitting needed for ethnographic work with anthropologists and tribal members on state land can lack clarity. Can you provide an understanding?
Wow, you got a stumper there. I do not know the answer. In my experience as the state archaeologist and just personally, it's been specifically with archaeological sites, which, has pretty clear permitting guidelines. I am not entirely sure any sort of requirements with regards to ethnographic work, but I can tell you that it is not a AAA issue. Like there's nothing in the AAA talking about ethnography and like working with tribal members. So if there are permitting requirements on, as far as other laws, then that may exist, but I'm not aware. Sorry, I can't give a better answer.
It is kind of blurred because more and more people are working with them now. So
yeah, which is great.
No, it is. No, it is great, but you're right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to let Donna close us out.
Well, we want to thank all of you for attending, and we hope that you will be attending for the next two, same day of the week, same time. Each one will be slightly different. You might prepare for your questions. Shannon, you were going to put your handout in the...
Oh, yes, thank you. I tried earlier and I couldn't figure it out. That was something I guess I've not done before. And
I'm wondering if we could also send it out when we send out the link.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that because I tried to just drag it into the chat and it is not letting me.
Yeah.
So I'll have, they'll send it out for you. My apologies on that.
And just remember, next week will be Mary Ellen Walsh from the State Historic Preservation Office. And then again, Shannon and Aaron Davis is also with SHPO, who will handle things. So if you think of other questions that you didn't get to ask, please save them and ask them the next time. And thanks again. Remember, we will also let you know when the recording has been posted, but do go on to our website now. I mean, not our website, our YouTube channel, and see some of the other things that we have had held in the past. Thanks again, and we will see you next week.